Hello folks, pretty much a lot of those who browse through the Walksnail FB group have stumbled upon some news and posts regarding the 4K camera from Caddx. In fact, there's one post that showcased a brief night flight comparison between a Walksnail 4K camera and the DJI-03. A lot of speculations and questions were raised hereafter, whether this is just a rumor, or the date when the 4K camera will be released, or if this camera will work on all existing VTX units. Well, today we end this queries as we unveil to you the Caddx Walksnail 4K camera in this video. Caddx decided to give it the name Moonlight, a 4K camera with a DJI-03 style VTX plus DVR module. As the name suggests, this should be capable of night shootings. At the time of recording this video, this unit is not yet out for public release. I think Caddx were trusting us to do initial test of the hardware. Without further ado, let's look at the contents of the box. We got here a quick start manual, a short cable which we will look into later, some screws and connectors, the standard LHCP antenna that ships with all other VTX units. There are two antennas supplied as this Moonlight VTX has dual antenna. And as you can see, it still uses the UFL type connector, which means you can swap them with your existing antenna. We got here the camera module itself, which looks like massive than older cameras, and the chunky VTX module that has ports on one side and another set of ports on the other side. This VTX seems to be milled from aluminum. Interestingly, there seems to be an ND filter installed on the camera, which makes it appear bigger than all other Walksnail cameras. Specifically, this one is ND8. Kudos to Caddx for providing one. The ND filter seems to be held by friction, and to remove it, you just need to pull it out. For the hardware, most likely one of the questions that will come in mind is how hefty this kit is. Excluding the connectors, the kit weighs 46 grams on my scale. Considering the size of the module, I took some measurements, and the VTX is around 34.5mm wide, about 13.5mm thick, and a little less than 35 across the other width. The ND filter width is about 19mm on either side, which is about the same size as the camera module itself. The MIPI cable routes at the bottom side of the camera, unlike that of the V1 cam, which goes through a hole at the center, in contrast to that of the Pro or V2 camera. The backplate of the 4K camera is made of aluminum, maybe for heat dissipation, unlike the Pro's plastic backplate. The supplied MIPI cable is the standard 14cm length. However, it is worth noting that the usable length will always be less because of the way the VTX cable is routed at the back of the camera. You also need to consider how the MIPI cable is connected on the VTX, as it could even make the usable length shorter depending on how you mounted the module. The length could be less than 10 centimeters. One workaround is to fold it towards the other side, so you can access more length of the MIPI cable. But this may not be ideal as it could result in breaking of the wires. Caddx could just have adapted how the MIPI is connected on the older units, where the MIPI cable goes towards one of the sides. With regards to the camera module, it is interesting that Caddx integrated a soft mount for vibration dampening. I bet this is to improve the output of the gyro flow as well as for the EIS feature of the Moonlight kit. Let's compare the Moonlight camera with the older Walksnail cameras I got. Let me remove the ND filter. Here it is side by side with the Pro camera. They are almost identical except that the Pro camera is a tad longer. But the width of the two cameras are identical. In any perspective, you may notice that the Pro camera extends a little longer than the Moonlight camera. Now let's compare it with the V1 camera. It is obvious that the V1 is way shorter than the Moonlight camera. And with the Nano camera, you can see how tiny the Nano appears beside the Moonlight camera. The lens of the Nano cam is obviously a lot smaller. Here's the supplied ND filter. The marking indicates that this is ND8. I'm not sure if Caddx will sell other kinds, but who knows. The filter just slides into the Moonlight camera and is held by friction. Just make sure to push it all the way through to avoid having the edges of the ND filter appear significantly on your FPV feed. Of course, we also checked if this filter fits in the older camera modules. It fits perfectly on the Pro camera as expected. On a V1 cam, it also fits, but I haven't checked if the edges will significantly appear on the FPV feed. This is the Moonlight VTX plus DVR module. And here's the retainer for the MIPI. On this side, you will see a familiar mounting pattern similar to the V2 VTX. Removing the screws exposes the MIPI connector. Now you may notice this is the same MIPI used in the older VTX units. This means you can replace it if it gets damaged. Or swap it with your other units as well since the MIPI is the same. Now let's put the Moonlight VTX beside my other VTX modules. This one is the one as VTX, the V1, and the V2 module. Size-wise, here's how the Moonlight VTX looks beside one as VTX. While the V1 and V2 VTX units are almost identical in size, the Moonlight VTX looks like twice the thickness of the V1 and V2. That's expected because there's a DVR board inside the aluminum casing too. But the widths or lengths are almost identical. Moving on to the ports, here's the supplied UART cable with JST-SH connector. It goes to the side of the Moonlight VTX. Caddx provided markings on the casing. Aside from the connector port, there are small solder pads for the TX and RX lines too. You will notice too on this side the bind button and the small LED indicators flashed in the casing. On this side are the antenna ports and another set of ports on the other side. The UART cable just plugs into the port like a little Lego. Interestingly, Moonlight shares the same UART port and cable with the older V2 VTX, which makes it more convenient to share accessories. The markings on both the Moonlight and V2 VTX are identical, so no issues using the accessory on the other. However, you will notice that the V1 VTX uses a 6-pin JST-SH, so one may not directly use it. It could still work though if you align the connectors with the corresponding pins. You may notice that my units have Type-C connector, and this is not something that came along with the kit but rather a product of DIY. I made it like this so I can swap easily between the Walksnail units. Now we get to see this short update cable that uses an even smaller connector. This cable plugs into the side of the module, which aims to connect the DVR and the VTX units for updating. The cable has a white wire that is intended to be plugged on the side of the port that has a white dot marking so we won't mix them up. Connectors slide in smoothly without the risk of breaking. This cable needs to be kept plugged during the updating process. The SD card slot is also on this side, and you might find it difficult to insert or remove the card if you have short fingernails. You may need to use a smaller tool, like another SD card, to push the card to release it. As per Caddx instructions, the DVR unit needs at least U3 microSD for 4K recording. Upon testing, 1 minute of 4K video is about 1 GB of file, so better get bigger ones if possible. These are the antennas that came with the Moonlight kit. Of course, you can use a different antenna or put a UFL to SMA connector if you prefer not to use the stock ones. In most of my Walksnail units, I installed such connectors so I can swap the antennas around the units. like these Faxier micro lollipops. To install the antennas, you need to remove this retaining plate held by two minuscule screws to access the UFL ports. Once removed, you are now free to plug in the UFL connector. But here's the tricky part. Unlike in the older VTX units where you can easily plug the UFL connectors, the current design of the Moonlight VTX unit makes it a lot more difficult to do so. Plugging the connector is not the main issue, but getting the connectors aligned is the problem, since you just get a little space to work with. If you are able to align the UFL connectors, it's just a matter of pushing those connectors down to lock it. In my first attempt, it took me about 15 minutes trying to figure it out. But upon practicing it a lot, I'm able to do it in less than 3 minutes now. The process is the same as said before. You will need to align the connectors, then use a small flat tip screwdriver to push the connectors down. After which, do not forget to put back the retaining plate. This will secure down the antenna connectors. I also did some bench testing on the Moonlight kit to see how hot it gets. I used a FLIR camera to check which side heats up more, and I found out that the side without the MIPI cable gets hotter than the opposite side. Thus, if you are to consider cooling your VTX, make sure to provide more airflow on the hotter side of the Moonlight VTX unit, especially if you are to mount it internally in a fixed-wing fuselage or wings. Let's do a quick recap on what we have talked today. First, we have unveiled the Walksnail Moonlight kit that shoots 4K and night shot capable. We got a single module VTX DVR that supports a dual antenna and SD card slot and has a similar 25x25 and 20x20 mounting patterns. We found that the Moonlight VTX shares the same pinout as the V2 VTX unit, which makes sharing of the accessories possible. We also got an ND8 filter included, which also fits on the Pro and perhaps the V2 and V1 cameras as well. Some of the not so good aspects of the Moonlight were the lack of notch on the SD card slot and the troublesome location of the UFL ports for the antenna. Overall, the design of the Moonlight exceeds what we have expected. For sure, this will be a very good competitor with other FPV systems in the market, given that it is capable of night shots. It's good that Caddx listened to the voice of the community and not just throw us whatever they decided to do. With regards to the downside of the unit, we've already given feedback as testers, not just as reviewers to Caddx. Caddx listens. For sure, they will continue to listen. And that's what we like about Caddx. They reside within our FPV community. I guess this is the end of part 1. Let me know your thoughts about the Moonlight by leaving a comment below. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.